absolute classic on Double 10. It had to be Double 10. The back-to-back world champion, the world number one, now adds the Win More World Masters to his ever-growing tally.
If you've been watching darts for a long time, you noticed something. It's hard to put your finger on exactly. The sport is bigger than it's ever been. More fans, more coverage, more noise. And yet, something shifted. The crowds feel different. The atmosphere feels different. Even the way people talk about darts feels different. And if you've been around long enough to remember what it used to be, you already know what this video is about. This isn't a complaint. This isn't a tribute. This is just a question. What exactly changed? And does anyone know when it happened? For a long time, darts had a certain feel to it. It lived in pubs. It ran on BBC Two. Players walked on to modest applause and got on with the job. Phil Taylor won 16 world titles. 16, the kind of record that should have made him a household name in every sport, in every country. And in dart circles, he absolutely was. But outside of that world, you could walk past someone who had never heard of him. That was just how darts worked. It had its fans, devoted ones, the kind who filled small venues and memorized averages and remembered every final. But it wasn't a cultural moment. The sport had two organizations running their own tournaments, their own worlds. Fans had preferences, strong ones. There were debates, rivalries, arguments that felt personal. And that was part of the appeal. When darts felt local, it felt personal. The crowd weren't just watching an event. They were part of one. You knew the players knew the crowd. Something about that dynamic was different to what you see today. Not better, not worse, just closer. The transformation didn't happen overnight. It was gradual. Darts stopped feeling like a niche sport and slowly started looking like something much bigger. The arenas got larger, the production got slicker, the audiences grew, and one organization eventually absorbed everything, while the other quietly faded away. For a while, those two worlds existed side by side, and then one day they didn't. The old organization was gone. And with it, something that had felt like a divide disappeared. Professional darts had one home now, one direction. And the question stopped being about which organization was more legitimate. It became something else entirely. The money got bigger, the crowds got louder, but maybe the biggest change wasn't inside darts at all. Maybe it was the moment the outside world started paying attention, because once that happened, there was no putting it back. And then a 16-year-old from Warrington walked into Alexandra Palace, and the outside world arrived all at once. Nobody outside of darts knew his name before December 2023. By the time that World Championship ended, people who had never watched a dart thrown in their lives were following his story. A teenager from Warrington, reaching the final on his debut, losing narrowly, going home with more prize money than most people see in years, and then coming back the following year and winning the whole thing at 17. But here's what people don't always talk about. What actually happens when a teenager becomes the face of an entire sport almost overnight? What does it feel like to be 17 years old and suddenly one of the most searched sports stars on Google? Before he could legally vote, he had documentary series commissioned about him. He was on Netflix. He was in mainstream news. His face was on cereal brands. He signed some of the biggest sponsorship deals in the sport's history. Sky Sports titled a documentary after him. Not about darts, about him. Littlemania was a phrase the mainstream media invented, not darts fans, the mainstream media. Because suddenly darts wasn't just a sport for people who followed darts. It was a story for everyone, and that changed the whole room. Not just who watched, but what it felt like to be inside it. The energy was different. The attention was different. The pressure on every player standing at that board was different. The players aren't the only thing that changed. Look at the crowd. Fancy dress. Phones recording everything. Huge groups on a night out, as much as fans of the sport. The atmosphere has volume and colour and unpredictability. For many people, That's exactly what they love about modern darts. But something else came with it. Years ago, the crowd watched the players. Today, the players sometimes have to manage the crowd. When a player wears ear defenders at the World Championship just to block out the noise, something has shifted. When a Premier League semi-final stops mid-leg because a player refuses to throw another dart until a fan is physically removed from the venue, the atmosphere has become part of the story. Not just a backdrop, not just noise. The crowd stopped being just the audience and slowly became part of the show. That creates energy. It also creates something more uncomfortable for the people standing at the OK. A darts referee said it plainly not long ago. Fans who can't behave shouldn't be there. And whether you agree with that line or not, the fact that it needed to be said at all tells you something about how the atmosphere has changed. The rewards in modern darts are extraordinary. Life-changing prize money, sponsorship, documentaries, global recognition. Things that players from 20 years ago could never have imagined when they picked up a set of darts. But the other side of it is just as real. Every missed double gets clipped and shared. Every interview gets analysed. Every moment of frustration gets screenshotted and posted within seconds. Players who used to perform in front of passionate but contained crowds now perform in front of people who are also creating content. There is no quiet night anymore. There is no match that appears after the last leg. Every reaction becomes a highlight. Every low point becomes a clip. Every admission of struggle becomes a headline. Did modern darts become bigger or simply harder to escape? Gerwen said he was going to tournaments not really wanting to be there. Luke Littler broke down in tears after a match he won. The sport that looks electric from the outside costs something from the inside. And that cost has gone up alongside everything else. The audience never really switches off. In modern darts, the players are always on. That's the part that rarely makes the highlights. Maybe darts didn't become worse. Maybe it didn't become better. Maybe it simply became too big to stay the same. Phil Taylor played for decades and never experienced anything like this. The sport he dominated didn't look or sound or feel like modern darts. And yet the darts itself is still the same. A board, a set of lines, a double to hit. The fundamentals haven't moved. Everything around them has. The fans who've been here the longest sometimes talk about the old days with a quietness that's hard to define. Not because they think modern darts is wrong. Not because they want it to shrink back down. Just a quiet recognition that something changed with the growth. Something they can feel but struggle to name. Maybe it was the intimacy. Maybe it was the sense that the crowd was there specifically for darts. Maybe it's simply that when something becomes this large, it stops belonging to the people who were there at the beginning. Maybe nothing was lost. Maybe the sport simply became too big to stay the same. And once something becomes this big, there is no going back.